Welcome to the Fredrickson Health Show, highlighting expert practitioners from health, fitness, injury prevention, functional medicine, and integrative medicine. If you are into upgrading and optimizing your health, this podcast is for you. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here is your host, Dr. Robert Fredrickson.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Fredrickson Health Show. Today we have Dr. John Lewis. Dr. John, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Dr. Fredrickson. It's great to be here with you. It's my pleasure.
Yes, and so you just got back from Thailand. Tell us about that. Tell us about the trip. What was the biggest takeaway or the most fun you had, and what kind of excursion did you do?
Thailand's an amazing country. I got $18 1-hour massages every day I was there. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, there's so much competition. You know, you got massage parlors literally all over Bangkok. So, you know, obviously with such huge supply, there's a cost associated with that that's pretty low. But yeah, it's an amazing place. I mean, the culture of Buddhism and just the architecture of the temples. I mean, it's just incredible how these temples were built, and you know, obviously very, very, very old, but people are very friendly. People are very nice. We went there not really for just pleasure. It was definitely for a particular purpose. We went to the VitaFoods Asia show. I had
Cool.
a couple of clients who wanted to check out the show, and so I worked with them on, actually I recorded some videos for one of the clients for one of their products, in addition to touring the show, talking to a lot of suppliers. And so it was very interesting. It was a good experience. I think that show's not as big as the supply side show in Vegas or even Expo West, the natural product show in Anaheim. But, you know, still for an Asia show, it's pretty big. And we had a good time. I mean, I'm still a little jet lagged, but we had a great time.
Sure. So was there a translator for you when you were doing your videos?
No, this was for English. This was for the Japanese company. They have a product called BioBrand that's an immunomodulator, and
okay.
So they do all of their stuff in English. It didn't have to be in Japanese.
Well, cool. So, Dr. Lewis, I'm pretty intrigued by your story. So I don't want to steal your thunder. So tell us how you got started with your career. You know, we'll start from the beginning, then how it kind of evolved to the nutrition side that you're in now.
Sure. Well, we can go way back. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandfather started pitching baseball to me in the backyard when I was just a little squirt. And that sort of put me on the path of playing sports and, you know, wanting to be active most of my life, all of my life really, in playing sports as a kid, and then getting into drug-free competitive bodybuilding in college. In undergrad was where I really started taking more of I guess you could say, a serious approach to sports activity, physical fitness, etc. But I eventually, I realized pretty quickly that you know, trying to be a bodybuilder wasn't, number one, it wasn't going to pay my bills. You know, there's very few bodybuilders in the world who can actually make a living doing that kind of thing. And
especially in the drug-free class.
Well, exactly. And to that point, drug-free guys, I mean, I don't know hardly anybody making a living. Of course, I've been out of that realm for a long time, so maybe I'm behind the times, but I knew that to take it to that kind of level, I had to take drugs, and I just wasn't willing to do that. I mean, I didn't necessarily think that, I didn't have any delusions of grandeur, let's say. I didn't think I was going to become the next Mr. Olympia, but anyway, as you know, I kind of evolved out of my 20s. I shifted from more of a, let's call it a performance perspective with nutrition and exercise to really more of a health orientation or perspective. And it really kind of dawned on me after a while. I was actually working with some Division I athletes when I was in grad school. And, you know, it's just all about the competition, right? It's all about the sport, and it doesn't really matter. You know, health is kind of secondary to performance and to trying to be a winner, basically. And it really dawned on me that that's such a small percentage of not even just our population, but really worldwide, of people who are genetically blessed enough to be able to have a career in professional sports. But yet everybody should be concerned about health. And of course, most aren't. That's why we have epidemics of chronic disease today. But nonetheless, we should all look at our health as our most important asset besides our time in this life. And so that's where it really led me to, this focus that I've had for so many years now on health in general, but specifically in nutrition, and then even more in depth than that into dietary supplementation. But it's been a long journey. I mean, I didn't really start out like in college or in grad school thinking I'd become a researcher for a portion of my life. That just sort of, I guess I kind of went through school becoming like a chameleon at each stop along the way. I'd learn new things, and then I would think, wow, this is really fascinating. And then it kind of, my path was kind of wandering, I guess you could say, but I ended up running clinical trials for about 20 years at the University of Miami Medical School. And that's really where I guess you could say my learning and sort of my more clearly defined path came into the light, I'm still trying to figure it out. But along that journey, as I started meeting people and, really kind of getting education, if you will, beyond what we learn in school and what we learn in our training, but just, real world practical experience where you meet someone in your life and then that person ends up changing your life. And that happened to me 2 times. And both were related to kind of the same thing, both in the, let's call it the general field of polysaccharide research or just the concept of polysaccharides or the topic. And neither person knew, which is fascinating, neither person knew each other. One was here in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, and the other person was still is in the Dallas area. And they just both completely changed my life. I mean, I ended up learning from them how these particular polysaccharides had changed their lives. The lady here in our area, this BioBran product that I mentioned, the rice bran from the Japanese company, this hydrolyzed rice bran. And then on the other side, from Dr. Reg McDaniel, a pathologist by training in the Dallas area, who had discovered all these different things in his work with allopolysaccharides. And so for the last nearly 20 years now, I mean, this is where my life got shifted down this road of looking into polysaccharides and how they're so beneficial to health. And yet, I mean, literally, I can talk to 99 out of 100 people, and maybe that one, knows something about polysaccharides, but the 99 have no clue. They don't even know what a polysaccharide is.
Sure. Right.
Let alone what it can do. So it's been a long journey. I think I still have a lot to do. There is a lot more that I want to do in my life and my career. I feel like I'm not one of these people who'll ever retire. I'm now old enough to where I have a few friends who now talked about retiring, or even a couple who have kind of retired. That's not going to be me. I'm not going to be the guy that, plays golf 3 days a week and the other 4 days sits on the beach and just kind of has, this lackadaisical or whatever life for the rest of whatever time I have left. I have too much that I want to do, and too many important things that I feel like need to be questions that need to be answered, and discoveries that hopefully can be made to be beneficial to humanity. And that's what drives me every day. And the work that I do with polysaccharides and hearing people, give me feedback to say, hey, this is really helping me in certain ways. And so that's what fuels me and drives me and inspires me to keep pushing forward, even though it's not easy. I mean, being in business,
Sure.
going from academics, leaving that a little over 6 years ago now, to being in business, neither has been a bowl of cherries. And,
Right.
I don't expect anything to be a bowl of cherries.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Lewis, I want to back up just a second. So when you were doing your research, what did you get your Ph.D. in, and what were you kind of studying for your research publications, back then?
So initially, my training was in physiology and a lot of very heavy science-oriented classes, biostatistics, research design, bioethics, all these sorts of things, really setting me up to be a good researcher. And so
Awesome.
So I have a pretty extensive background in all those areas, although, it's been so long ago. If I'm not, it's like riding a bicycle. If you're not doing it every day, you lose it. So I can rely on certain things, like, even though academic publishing is not really a focus of mine anymore as a business person, I still publish occasionally. In fact, I have a paper currently under review for publication, but I have enough of those, hardwired skills that have been, just for so much repetition. In other words, doing statistics, looking at data in a certain way to say, hey, can we, do this analysis, and then looking at the results and making sense of it. So I still have enough of that sort of academic programming left from all those years of being an academic so that I can still do those things. But yeah, it was a pretty heavy and intense, like a little over 5 years of training of again, physiology, statistics, research design, these kinds of things, very heavy focused on really setting myself up to be a researcher, even though I really didn't quite appreciate it at the time as a student, but it turned out to be, a very, I guess you could say, a solid base, even though, again, I learned a lot more after finishing school. There were certainly many things that I needed to learn to be a good academician, and, running clinical trials. I mean, that's obviously very intense work as well. So,
Oh yeah. So just for people listening, can you let people know kind of what the difference is in a randomized control trial versus a meta-analysis versus a case report, just for people, listening, maybe even like the tiers of, like
sure.
quality that you might look for in in a good study, because now, there's a lot of evidence-based, articles. We like to have research, but sometimes, let us know about maybe the validity or, more of the gold standards that you should strive for when you're looking at research, and how you maybe evaluate different research papers. Because I think it's good to know.
Well, that's a very fascinating question, and it's a loaded one, because it would probably, we'd go the rest of the interview talking about these.
Yeah. Just real quick. Yeah. Just a short synopsis, maybe.
But I would say that, for those of us on the health side, and I'm using health very generically, but I'm referring to people like us doing, whether it's nutrition, supplementation, exercise, even complementary things like acupuncture. We kind of get thrown into the paradigm of the double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, but that's really a pharmaceutical standard. And I say that very specifically because Big Pharma can utilize that design very effectively, because they're testing a chemical typically, or it could be, I guess, a couple of chemicals, but usually it's a chemical, and they have a metabolite that they can measure, at different time points to see how the body utilizes that particular chemical. So it's a very efficient model for anything pharmacological. It's not a very efficient model for nutrition. So, for example, all the clinical trials that I've run in my career related to, again, nutrition, supplementation, exercise, we can use that model. I mean, there's nothing that says we can't use it. But at the end of the day, because, for example, let's say vitamin D, that was one of the trials that we ran at the University of Miami. Well, we're looking at vitamin D in this one supplement, but look at everything else going around you. I mean, especially here in South Florida, you can go out in the sun, take most of your clothes off, go out in the sun for 15, 20 minutes in South Florida and get a really nice dose of vitamin D. You're eating it in your food. So how do you control for all of that? Very difficult. So
Sure.
When you try to apply that pharmacological paradigm or standard onto everything else that's natural, it makes it very difficult. And unfortunately for those of us in the natural or the health world, Big Pharma can pick and choose and really knock down other studies or other articles and make these claims of, oh, well, this is a bogus study, or look at the flaws in this study, because again, you're applying this paradigm that doesn't really work for health-related interventions. But nonetheless, to answer your question, I mean, clearly, if you can control for enough of the variables or enough of the variances or cofactors or co-founders, although that would be very expensive in my opinion, usually, then that is a good design or standard. But I mean, you have things like all the way from, say, cells and tissues, what we call basic research, preclinical, to animals, which is another form of basic or preclinical research. And then you have stuff in human beings, whether it's a cross-sectional observation where you just simply, you enroll a group of people, and then one time you collect a bunch of information, and then you make correlational observations around, maybe some biomarkers and some psychological stuff. Then you have clinical trials, which is what I spent most of my career doing, where you're enrolling people in an intervention over a period of time, and then you collect, multiple data points. You have the same things that you collect over whether it's 90 days, 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be. But you want to look at those observations serially and then be able to make answer questions around, okay, well, did this change over this period of time based on this intervention? And then finally, you have things like very large observational studies of thousands of people, in some cases, hundreds of thousands, like the Harvard Nurses Health Study, where people are analyzed over decades usually. So they have this gigantic battery of assessments that they do, maybe once a year, maybe every other year. Again, it depends whether it's Harvard Nurses Health Study, Framingham, NHANES. There are a lot of those big studies going on over time. And then you have that very sort of helicopter view of what happens to people observationally over their lives. You're not intervening with them, but at certain points in their life, you're taking data and then you're making sense of it kind of at a population level. Although again, it's got a lot of error too, because you're relying on the person to give you accurate responses when you give them a big battery of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the blood and the urine can't lie. I mean, those biomarkers are not fabricated in any way, but certainly with those kinds of studies, you have, well, and really in all studies, you have different types of error. It just depends on the type of error you're comfortable with. But really from again, cells, tissues, and animals all the way to humans, and then in different ways that you look at human behavior. I mean, these are typically the kinds of studies that we refer to in, let's call it, biobehavioral medicine. And then more specifically, like in nutrition and supplementation, a lot of times people ask me, well, how do you make sense of nutrition research? Because it's so varied, and, depending on what you're looking for, you may show different things. I mean, salt is a good example. Like, how many times over the last 40 or 50 years have you heard different things about salt? Like, oh, it's bad. No, it's good. Oh, it's bad. Oh, it's good. It's just
right. Yeah. Or cholesterol, or yeah.
Cholesterol, exactly. Eggs. I mean, there are just so many different things that go back and forth over time. But to me, I think the best way that you can evaluate nutrition information, and again, this is not just a snapshot, you really need to look at this, over a period of time, but you take what goes on in cells and tissues, what goes on in animals, and then what goes on in humans, and you kind of put that picture together as best as you can to make, again, it's still going to be a cloudy picture, but at least as much clarity through the clouds as you can see to say, okay, this makes sense. I mean, I'm not I never ran studies on animals. I never really, that was not my thing, but I think there is a little bit of merit, even though, mice, rats, guinea pigs, whatever, they have different enzyme systems, certainly different genetics, but you can take those animals as a model of, say, Alzheimer's disease or diabetes or heart disease or whatever, and then do different interventions with them and then see some outcomes. The problem, of course, though, is that you then try to translate that to the human experience, and it's almost impossible. I mean, I think fasting is a very good example. Like, we know with fasting in rodents, you can extend their life, I don't know, 20, 30%, whatever it is.
Right, yeah.
But how the heck are you going to get human beings to enroll in that type of research, over, forget 6 months or a year? I mean, maybe if you're lucky, you can do that. But I mean, you can't even consider, doing something like that on a lifespan of a human being. I mean, imagine how much that would cost. Imagine, putting people in a metabolic kitchen their whole lives and then, following them. I mean, it would be impossible. So there's a lot of error when we try to translate information from cells, tissues, and animals to the human experience. But again, I'm thinking, in my nutrition world that I'm so focused on today, that it's you just have to do the best you can in terms of being able to sort of combine all this information together. You mentioned the word meta-analysis. I mean, that's another interesting tool that people use. They go out and they do a search on PubMed or whatever their preferred search engine is, and they collect a bunch of articles, and then they take that information and then they try to pool all that together, and then they run some sophisticated statistics on that pooled data to then say, okay, did all these different studies show us, something at least partially consistent? And that's another tool that people use, again, to try to make sense out of all the different data out there that come from, all different parts of the world. And I think obviously one of the limitations, I mean, in a lot of my work, we looked at, say, for example, cognitive measures. Well, I mean, there's a whole, there's a dictionary or there's an encyclopedia full of all these different measures that assess cognition. So if one study is using the ADAS-Cog and one study is using, the SIB and another study's using the mini mental and another study's using the mocha. How the heck do you put all that together and say, okay, well, here's what consistently you're looking at, or you can show in cognition, when all the different ways that cognition was assessed were not even the same. So it's like,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of all the information out there is a bit, it's beyond challenging. It's actually overwhelming.
Yeah, but I like the first thing you said in the beginning, is that there are studies in health and wellness. There are studies in nutrition, but they might be a lot smaller sample size, compared to maybe a pharmaceutical trial or, a vaccine trial. And so a lot of these, bigger companies, or sometimes even clinicians, will discount these smaller studies. But I always say, hey, they are smaller for a reason. Nutrition and supplementation pathways, they're different, and they're affecting multiple enzyme systems, not just one, like a medication does. And so, but I do think that research is emerging, it's evolving. There's bit larger sample sizes. There's now some, clear-cut evidence for health and wellness. And just real quick, was there any study, while you're doing this, is at University of Miami, correct?
Yes.
So was there any like nutrition study that really stood out to you with some like really, fascinating results that you're like, oh man, like this was really cool? Is there anything that kind of like stood out to you that you still remember?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the work that we did with the polysaccharides is ultimately why I left academics in the first place. And so,
Okay, perfect.
Yes,
Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kid you not, with the results that we got from this formula that we refer to generically as it's called Aloe Polymannose Multinutrient Complex. And again, that is to very specifically say that, to your point about, what you just said about medication, we did not choose this pharmacological paradigm of, only looking at one thing. We always want to winnow it down to the magic bullet, or that one thing that we need to do. And as you know, physiology is not about one thing, it's about many. But this complex, this formula that we used in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, and then in people with relapse remitting multiple sclerosis, I mean, well, especially the Alzheimer's, and I'll share just kind of the highlights with both studies, but especially with the Alzheimer's study, I mean, it was beyond anything we expected. So we put people on this dietary supplement formula for 1 year. Again, these were people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's, people that Big Pharma has no.
And what was let's backtrack just a little bit. What was in the dietary supplement, and what is the definition of a polysaccharide? What does that mean?
Okay, sure. Yeah, let's back up a little bit on that, because I kind of glossed it. But, well, so, a lot of times when I use this term polysaccharide, I could have said complex sugar, but unfortunately, because of the way the media has basically brainwashed everyone into thinking sugar is bad for us, if I said, well, sugar is good for you, you'd say, oh, this guy's crazy. Like, what is
right? Sure, of course.
Sugar's not good for you. Are you kidding me? But a sugar is not a sugar, and a sugar is very different, depending on where it comes from. And of course, its bonds or its molecular structure. So I'm right there with you. If you say, well, high fructose corn syrup is something we ought to avoid, or sucrose, absolutely. I mean, limit, if not avoid, those sugars entirely. But these complex polysaccharides, again, depending on, I mean, they're very complex in the sense that they can't even be completely characterized. They're so complex that it's almost impossible to actually characterize, visually. I'm saying, like a graphic artist, somebody that has that level of talent, to be able to actually draw these things. They're so complex. They're basically like 5D structures. And so the two that I'm referring to specifically that I spent all of these years at the University of Miami studying, and I mentioned them briefly before. One is a hydrolyzed rice bran that comes from just regular old rice bran, but it's been hydrolyzed with shiitake mushroom enzyme. And the second one is the polysaccharide from the aloe vera interleaf gel. Now, no one eats aloe vera. I don't personally know of anybody. I don't know if you do. I mean, there's a such thing as aloe vera juice that people drink occasionally, but
I've done the juice before. Yeah.
Well, a lot of times people say, well, John, this polysaccharide sounds interesting. Can I just drink it from the juice? And I'm like, no. And I'll tell you why, because aloe vera, the gel is about 99% water. And you'd have to drink bucket loads of that gel or that juice to get it, like a tiny little amount of the polysaccharide. So the polysaccharides have to be stripped out or extracted out of the gel. You first you dehydrate it, and then you still have different nutrients there, but then you extract out the polysaccharides from all the other things. And now you've got the stuff that, in my opinion, Mother Nature has given us the most amazing plant known to humanity. And I'd put that up against curcumin or anything else out there. I mean, I've just seen this time and time again.
Interesting.
Do such amazing things for people's health, not just in brain health, where a lot of my work was focused, but in many different areas. But anyway, a polysaccharide again is a very complex sugar that comes from the aloe vera and comes from the rice bran of the rice kernel. And so I like to tell people, just because we think that sugar is bad for us, you have to be very careful with language. And it's too dangerous to me, or dangerous, maybe that's not a good word. It's too loose to me just to say, oh, sugar's bad for you. No, that's not true. It depends on the type of sugar, whether it's a simple or a complex sugar, and it depends on the source of it. So, I just encourage all your listeners to don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when you hear the word sugar, because again, a sugar is not a sugar. And I have a lot of science behind me to back this up, science from my own lab as well as from people around the world who have looked at these polysaccharides and their benefits. And by the way, I don't care if you're vegan or carnivore or keto or Mediterranean. I don't care what your diet style is. You're not getting these polysaccharides from your food, and that's why it's important to supplement them in a dietary supplement, because otherwise you're not getting them. I mean, you might be getting a little bit from rice if you like to eat brown rice every day, which I like brown rice, and I eat it not maybe every day, but most days. But even still, in a food, you're getting, the concentration is probably not enough to have a therapeutic benefit. So
yeah,
that's where dietary supplements can really make a big difference for people, regardless of your dietary preference or philosophy.
definitely. So aloe vera is pretty fascinating to me. Could you talk about maybe some of the early history of aloe vera, maybe some of the early medicinal uses, and where we are today, for the polysaccharide research that you've been doing?
Well, I think historically, if you are, well, not even historically, but if you just ask 100 people on the street, hey, what do you think about aloe vera? Most people think of it as a topical application, right? They think of it for a
sunburn, yeah,
a cut, a wound, and those are actually outstanding uses of it. And I think FDA even has given some sort of a provisional claim for companies that use aloe vera gel as a topical remedy for wound healing. So, clearly going way back, I mean, I think even in the Bible and other very old texts, it's been documented that humans have been using the aloe vera plant for healing for thousands of years. I mean, at least as long as recorded history, up to a point of, I guess, people in the Middle East, where I think aloe vera originally is where it's native to, or at least in that part of the world, the Middle East, Africa. I think the recorded information, very old recorded information, shows that humans have been using aloe vera for thousands of years. But fast forward to today, and again with Dr. McDaniel, the gentleman that I mentioned a little while ago, who introduced me to the aloe polysaccharides benefit. And oh, by the way, I can tell you, when I was in grad school, I mean, I can think back to biochemistry. I don't know about you, but I may have had not even a full lecture on polysaccharides, but maybe like half of a lecture on saccharides, and just kind of a very brief mention of saccharides being an energy source. But really, that was it. I mean, any of this stuff that I may mention to you about inflammation, immunomodulation, oxidation, stem cell proliferation, I mean, I had no clue. None of that stuff was taught to me as a student. And that's not necessarily the professor's fault. I mean, he probably knew nothing about it as well. So,
I can't remember or recall that being taught in school. There's definitely something I had to learn about, later on. Just my fascination with, this health and wellness industry. And I'm constantly on PubMed or Google Scholar looking up something. And for polysaccharides, is there, some mushroom complexes can also have polysaccharides, correct?
Absolutely. Mushrooms, a lot of the medicinal mushrooms, whether it's lion's mane, I mentioned shiitake, maitake, reishi, all these have different polysaccharides. A lot of different seaweeds have polysaccharides. These are all very, very, very beneficial foods for us to eat. Now I can't quote you a lot of literature on, well, it's definitely not the seaweeds. I just know, kind of superficially that some of them have polysaccharides, and of course the mushrooms as well. That's not really been my focus in terms of my own work or my research, but I would definitely put the aloe vera stuff and even the rice bran research up pretty much against any other plant that I'm aware of. I'm guessing there must be lots of other plants out there in the world, in different jungles and different, maybe not necessarily tropical, but temperate environments that haven't even been discovered yet. I mean, I can only imagine the world's a huge place.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
there are probably lots of other plants that have medicinal value, whether it's a polysaccharide or not, who knows? But yeah, I think like you, I mean, when I met Dr. McDaniel, it's been almost 20 years ago now. And I started getting a very fast education from him about the work that they had done. He and his colleagues, unfortunately for him, when he first got introduced to this, it was through a group of guys that had HIV back in the mid 80s. And this was way before antiretroviral medication. And, back then, if you got HIV and it progressed to AIDS, you were dead. I mean, there wasn't really much that could be done for people back then. But this group of guys were taking this aloe vera product, and they had no viral load, and their CD4 cells were normal. And they came to Dr. McDaniel, and they wanted, they were trying to understand scientifically or have a better understanding of what it was that this aloe vera product was doing for them. And he thought he was being pranked. I mean, he thought it was a joke. He, as a pathologist running a pathology lab in Dallas, he thought, why are these people coming to me? Like, I know nothing about this stuff.
Yeah.
But thankfully for me and everybody else that he has now touched millions of lives, literally, they wouldn't take no for an answer. And so he finally started looking into it. Well, his physician colleagues at the University of Texas, they had no interest in it, but he had a few friends at the Texas A&M vet school. And so, veterinarians typically have a better orientation toward nutrition than physicians do. And they ended up looking into this product and started running a bunch of studies. And it just, it branched from there. And Dr. McDaniel went from practicing pathology to basically practicing nutrition. I mean, it completely changed the man's life. And so he'd already been at this for about close to 20 years when he and I met. And then as I mentioned, it completely changed my life. But I mean, it's just time and time again, I use the analogy of like, if you have an older car and maybe over time your car has accumulated some water in the gas tank, and so it's not really running well. It's certainly not running like it was new when you drove it off the lot for the first time. But let's say you get the gas cleaned out, you get the water cleaned out of the gas, you start using high test gasoline, and now your car's running, like almost a new car again. Well, the same thing with nutrition, and even more specifically with these polysaccharides. If you're the kind of person who is a typical American, not been eating too well, not exercising, not really managing your stress, but then suddenly you start making changes and you specifically start introducing polysaccharides into your diet, I mean, it's just, man, it's like you're a new person again. I mean, it's like literally setting your clock back, because now all of your cells are functioning like they were designed to. And so you can actually start doing all these things that your cells were, begging and really desperate to do, but they were not being given the proper raw materials to do their typical and usual functions. So I've just seen these things work so many times, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about the results of our research, if you like. But it's incredible what they can do for all of us.
Yeah. So yeah, when I always think of aloe vera, just focusing on that, that compound, I would always think of it, as a cooling herb, use it for sunburns. But in the supplement space, I'd use it more of like a demulcent herb, cooling the gut lining, helping heal and soothe maybe the gut mucosa. I also know there's a lot of products out there that use it for GERD or for, reflux disorders. Of course, it's a part of a lot of different intestinal permeability protocols as well. For kind of those healing properties, so you're using it for that, but you're also using it for kind of immune modulation. So how does a polysaccharide work? How does it integrate with their cells and the immune system? What is is there a simple you know, mechanism of action you could explain for us and how that works? Or if not, that's okay. We can talk about the studies, but just want to get everyone a kind of a clear picture of how important these things are and how they work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've looked at a couple of different mechanisms of action in our own research. In the Alzheimer's study, we looked at brain-derived neurotropic factor being one of those mechanisms. But I think to answer your question, it's actually, they're pleiotropic. I mean, they're not just one thing or another. So for example, like the stuff that you were mentioning related to the gut, I think what's going on mostly there is related to their effects as a prebiotic. I think they actually have a very profound impact on the microbiome, primarily as a prebiotic. But I think it's interesting when you think about what happens to these polysaccharides once they get decomposed, degraded, metabolized down into their metabolites, because I think those downstream metabolites are where they really start to have the most impressive effects. So going all the way down to like what the study of glycobiology or glycomics has showed us so far is that these polysaccharides are actually utilized within the cell. So have the steps in between, like the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi, there are different molecules that are required of these different ratios of these polysaccharides that are required in those steps. So all of this glycosylation is very dependent on having the correct polysaccharides in those particular steps. Now, interestingly enough, because these polysaccharides are not essential, meaning that the body can take other types of saccharides and then put those together to create the polysaccharides that it needs, by definition, they're not essential like essential amino acids or essential fatty acids. So the body has its own intelligence to be able to take other types of sugars and then put those together to create the polysaccharides that it needs for those organelles' functions. But what's fascinating to me is when you think about this, and this is really kind of a little more philosophical rather than purely physiological, why is it that we are so overridden with all of these chronic diseases today? I mean, there are lots of answers to that question, that rhetorical question. So the body can, and where I'm going with this is that while the body on the one hand can take all these other sugars that people are getting in their diet and utilize those things, to function, let's say at some nominal level, like it's certainly not for optimal health, but at least it's preventing, death, if you will. I mean, I know that's a very extreme and wide distinction between two dichotomies, but somewhere in between there, what happens when you, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when you introduce these polysaccharides directly from mostly aloe vera and rice bran, at least in my experience, something really profound happens. And that is, again, going back to my car analogy, the body suddenly starts functioning the way it's supposed to. So there's something to be said about taking these particular polysaccharides from these two plants and then helping the body basically be what it's supposed to, as opposed to just saying, well, John, I don't really care what you're saying. I'm going to continue eating the standard American diet and I'll let my cells figure it out for themselves. So there's something very profound and there's something unique about these materials and actually getting them through the diet, as opposed to, again, just saying, oh, well, they're not essential, so they're not really needed. I don't know if that kind of, and I know I didn't really answer your question yet, but
no, you did. And I think, prebiotics and how the role in being, a fuel source to the microbiota is such a huge piece for our microbiome. And we know, the gut is, a big part of our immune system, the majority of our immune system, and, the majority of our serotonin is produced in our gut. And so there's so many different things that can affect our gut health. And if we can improve it with, a prebiotic from a polysaccharide from aloe vera, I mean, yeah, that's going to be huge. And of course, with your research with the brain, can you talk about maybe how gut health, is interconnected with brain health and how that whole system plays a part with your research? Because I know from your talks that you've done a lot of talks on healthcare where it is today. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, but our quality of life is not, as good as some other countries. And that was a big part of your TED Talk that you did 10 years ago for the University of Miami, or at Miami, I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, let me just finish one other point before we jump to that
Sure.
topic.
Yeah.
I think there was something very important that I didn't mention yet, and that is, as I mentioned a little while ago about the complexity of polysaccharides almost being like this 5D model, if you will. And again, these are through studies not from my lab, but from other people around the world. It's been shown that these polysaccharides have so much more content or information for the cells, ultimately going down to the genes compared to, again, amino acids or fatty acids. I think that's a very important thing for people to remember. And again, I think this goes back to why these two plants in particular produce these polysaccharides that, again, are so beneficial for us. I mean, you have the prebiotic effect or action on the one hand, but again, downstream from that, you have all these other things that are being affected all the way into the cells, again, all the way down into your Golgi and your endoplasmic reticulum, and again, even going all the way down into your genes. I mean, all this information, and this is not just true for these polysaccharides, but literally everything that we stick into our mouths, and of course, everything that we sense through the rest of our senses as well. But all that information ultimately goes down into our genes to either suppress or express a gene, and we hope it's doing that type of work for benefit, not for detriment. But I think it's very important for our listeners to remember that these polysaccharides have so much coded information in them, and that is the reason why ultimately they work, whether it's through, and of course we don't use the words treating, curing, mitigating, managing disease to talk about nutrition. To me, this is much more fundamental than this. This is enabling the bioengineering of life for the body to heal itself. And that's way more important than talking about treating disease. This is actually allowing the body to use these raw materials to heal itself. And so that's the reason why, for me, this is such important work. But moving forward to answer your question, I mean, I think, when you talk about, well, really just, I mean, kind of moving forward in terms of health in general, I mean, it's so important for us to recognize, gaps, if you will, in our own behavior, right? I mean, I'm the kind of person, I'm sure you are too, I'm the kind of person where you would never hear me in a TED Talk or a lecture or anything else talking about things that I think other people should do, and then meanwhile, I don't do it myself.
Right. Me
right?
too.
I mean, I would feel like the biggest hypocrite on the planet, excuse me, if I was talking about, some research or some information that could be very beneficial to people, but then meanwhile, I never work out and I eat at Taco Bell every day and I don't supplement and I don't drink water. And, I'm just basically a lazy couch potato who, has no interest in health and wellness. So I think it's very important for us to think about, health and wellness as our own responsibility, right? Like we've gotten to a point in our country's history where we're so overridden with chronic disease, and we're spending now, what is it, like $4.5 trillion per year on this medical management system that's not even a healthcare system. I hate that term. It's not a healthcare system, but yet we're not focused, or we're not oriented on the individual level of what we can do individually to help our country get over this, right? Like we're not even there. I mean, I don't know about you, but every day in my life, I'm dealing with people that they need so much help, and they're so confused by all the information floating around out there, and they're really just so kind of lost that they don't even know what to do.
It's challenging, and a lot of people don't even know where to start because they've heard so many different things. They're constantly bombarded with advertisements, with marketing, with lack of time, sometimes lack of resources. But yeah, we miss the basics sometimes with exercise, with sleep, stress reduction, and then of course diet. Yeah, I mean that's some of the easiest things I think we can tackle are diet, getting some basic movement, sleeping better, getting our stress under control. And if we control those, we can have a lot of different impacts on our health. But a lot of people don't know where to start. And especially, I think the diet is one of the most confusing things out there, maybe followed by the exercise selection. But I know you're pretty so we'll jump around here a little bit. Let's go back to what you found with brain health. I think this is a very fascinating topic, and some of the research, raw materials, different vitamins and supplements that you guys have studied, and some of the conclusions that the studies found when studying the supplements for brain health, Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad we circled back around to this because, again, this was really the research that sort of highlighted my academic career, which spurred me to leave academics actually and go into business. But this study that I'm referring to in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's using this aloe polymannose multinutrient complex, we put them on this formula for 1 year. And we drew their blood at baseline in 12 months. And then we did the neurocognitive assessment at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. Unfortunately, our study was limited. Our budget was limited actually, because, you know, we weren't dealing with millions of dollars here. We actually had about 200,000, which, you know, sounds like a lot of money, but in reality, running a clinical trial for 1 year in very sick people is very expensive. So we weren't able to draw blood at 3, 6, and 9 months. But what we ultimately showed was that at 9 and 12 months, clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function. And remember, these were people, again, with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. These were people that had to be diagnosed for at least 1 year. We didn't change their medication. We didn't mess with their diet, exercise, nothing else. We simply gave them this dietary supplement formula. And oh, by the way, they were 79.9 years of age on average, so very, very old folks. And oh, by the way, they had everything else you can think of, whether it was depression, diabetes, some form of heart disease. I mean, very, very old, very, very sick people. And so we, again, showed, and I'm very distinct in this, what I'm saying here, clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function according to the ADAS-Cog, which is widely considered to be the gold standard of assessing cognition, particularly in dementia studies. It's been published probably in at least a couple of thousand articles since it was created. So, I mean, this blew us away. You know, we had hopes. We were optimistic going into the study that we would show something. We just had no idea it would be this good. And so and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant or egotistical, but there's literally nothing else out there. In that first paper we published 3 articles, and we have a 4th one actually currently under review right now from the study. But we published that first paper in 13. There's not been anything before or since that even shows anything remotely close to that kind of a finding. And oh, by the way, FDA doesn't even require big pharma to actually look at cognitive function when they're making an application for a drug for dementia. Does that make any sense? I learned that a couple of years ago. I thought that is just mind-boggling. How do you propose a drug to treat dementia and you don't even look at cognition in your research? I mean, that's just another one of the bizarre things about life we're living in today. But
yeah.
But anyway, to support that clinical change, we showed reductions in TNF alpha and VEGF. That's also probably the first time that was actually shown in Alzheimer's. I mean, classically, those are looked at in heart disease and cancer, but we showed that probably for the first time in people with Alzheimer's. We showed an improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. I mentioned the guys with HIV a few moments ago. Your CD4 cells are your helper cells. Your CD8 cells are your cytotoxic cells. So not just for Alzheimer's or dementia, I mean, for all of us, as we go through life, we want that ratio relatively to be as high as possible. I mean, I guess there could be a case where maybe your CD4s get too out of control. But, you know, to have that also improve, so showing that immunomodulatory effect. And then finally, we showed the CD14 cells, which are a marker of adult stem cells. Those changed by just under 300% over the course of the intervention. So
300%.
Just under 300%. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And so remember, these were people that are just under 80 years of age on average. And we showed an increase in their adult stem cell proliferation over that 12-month period of just under 300%. I mean, all these findings just absolutely blew us away. The second 2 papers that we published from this study were very specific around, I mentioned brain-derived neurotropic factor a few moments ago. We looked at the changes in that protein in one paper, linking it or correlating it with all the cognitive measures, and then in the other paper, correlating it with all the immune and inflammation markers. We were trying to find if we could really help to better understand, you know, what it was mechanistically going on in our study. Unfortunately, again, and going back, you know, that many years ago, I don't even know how good imaging would have been at that time in terms of actually looking at the morphology of the brain. So we didn't have, even if it would have been decent at that time, we didn't have the money for it anyway. So in other words, we couldn't look exactly into the brain and see what changes were occurring. BDNF only went up by about 11%, so it was a non-statistically significant improvement, but nonetheless, it still increased a little bit. But when you categorized it at 5,000, I think it's picograms per milliliter, I forget the exact units. But there was a previous study we ran prior to that one where we looked at some people with HIV, and we were looking at dementia related to people taking these antiretrovirals, and we showed that this 5,000 threshold was an interesting point where if you were above 5,000, your cognitive function was better, and if you were below it, your cognitive function was worse. And it actually turned out to be true in our study as well, in the Alzheimer's study. So all those things together were really fascinating. I kind of hate to not mention it, but this fourth paper that we have under review is really exciting because we're also going to show, and I'm crossing my fingers, I think it's almost published. I actually just submitted all the comments to a second review yesterday, but we're also going to show, I think for the first time, I usually don't talk about things before they're published, but my excitement's getting the best of me here. I'll just briefly mention that we're going to be publishing for the first time in people with Alzheimer's, looking at the Th1 to Th2 ratio in immune function. And this is really exciting, and I think it's kind of groundbreaking here, because when I started coming up with this idea back actually toward the end of last year, it's almost a year ago, I was looking at this so-called inflammation index, and that didn't really turn out to be anything fruitful in terms of the statistics that I ran. But as I was looking at these different cytokines and growth factors, TNF-alpha, interferon gamma, IL-2, IL-4, and IL-10, those are the combination of the 5. There's 6 ratios, this Th1 to Th2. And so normally this stuff has been looked at like in things like, actually MS a little bit, but mostly in things like rheumatoid arthritis, different types of allergies, this autoimmune stuff.
Can you define like what Th1 is, Th2 for the listeners, just so they know what that ratio means and why it's important? Just real quick, yeah.
Again, these are different components of the immune system. So Th1 is classically looked at again in things like autoimmune issues. Th2 is classically looked at in things like allergies. So if you're Th1 dominant, then you might be responding to like a virus or some kind of a bacterial infection that then triggers you into this chronic autoimmune issue, and then you're dysregulated, for years maybe, or life in some cases. Whereas Th2, you get Th2 dominant, and maybe you have food allergies, or maybe you've got environmental issues, or some kind of a sensitivity to something that creates an allergy in you. But ideally, you want Th1 and Th2 to be, kind of at unity most of the time.
Yeah, balance. Yeah.
Like this or that. And so it's very important for, again, anybody with an autoimmune condition or anybody with a serious allergy condition to look at your Th1 to Th2 ratio and try to get it, back to here as opposed to here or here. Well, no one has ever even looked at this to our knowledge in Alzheimer's disease. I mean, when you think about Alzheimer's as the 6th leading killer of Americans today and costing us upwards of $500 billion in formal and informal care costs, and we still cannot even come up with, some kind of a scientific consensus on what causes or contributes to this disease. I mean, there are lots of different theories. And of course, you have, beta amyloid and tau protein. I mean, those tangles and plaques, those are obviously some of the leading issues. But even within that area, there's very inconsistent results related to my brain is completely full of plaques and tangles, but yet I have perfect cognition. I mean, it's not like a 100% slam dunk theory to the disease, but now there's other things like, type 3 diabetes and infections and all these other things that people are trying to come up with to say, well, this is, a much more important causative factor. But nonetheless, going back to our new paper, which is what's so exciting, is one of my co-authors and I, we spent hours on PubMed trying to find any other paper that had ever documented the Th1 to Th2 data in people with Alzheimer's disease. We found 0 papers.
Interesting.
No one had ever even looked at this. So we're going to publish for the first time we're first going to characterize it, which if you look at our numbers, you're going to say, oh my God, no wonder people with Alzheimer's are so sick. They're wildly Th1 dominant. I mean, their ratios are just off the chart. We have another study that we ran in.
Good to know. Yeah.
Yep. In people that were healthy. It was a different clinical trial we ran. I took those people, I compared them to the Alzheimer's people. The healthy people, most of their values are very close to unity. I mean, they're very, very balanced. But yet, and then compared to the Th1 dominant Alzheimer's people, the numbers are just ridiculous. So that's the first thing that we've done. The second thing we've done is that we've looked at it over that 12-month period. 5 out of the 6 ratios go toward unity. They get more balanced in response to our dietary supplement. So that's a really nice finding. And then the cherry on the cake, the icing on the cake, whatever you want to call it, is that the change in
the polysaccharide cake.
Thank you. The polysaccharide cake, exactly. The improvement or the rebalancing of those ratios over the 12-month period is correlated with improvements in cognition. I mean, it's just like such a beautiful paper. So again, I'm being a little bit presumptuous that it's going to be published here in the next week or two, hopefully, but I feel pretty confident that it will be, but again, because it's such novel information. And so I'm really excited about, what we've done here. I will say that I didn't mention this before, but one of the reasons that I left academics is after we published that first paper in 13, I was so excited. I was kind of a bit more naive of the way the world works at that time compared to today. But, I was so excited about this information. I was so excited about the discoveries that we were making. And I just knew in my heart that NIH and the Alzheimer's Association were going to look at our data and say, wow, look at what these guys are doing at the University of Miami. We're going to give them more money to help them. I tried twice with NIH, twice with the Alzheimer's Association. I submitted proposals. I got that much money in response. Zero. I got $0 in response. And I'm sure I don't know if your listeners know, NIH in particular, I can't speak as much about the Alzheimer's Association, but NIH in particular, they don't want to fund anything unless they think their money is going to be successful. If it's going to turn out to show something that they can hang their hat on to say, here, we gave, this guy $1 million at the University of whatever, and he showed that his particular treatment or intervention worked, and, this is a nice message that we can, stick a feather in our hat for. I mean, it was so deflating and it was so angering that I could not get these so-called public health experts or these so-called authorities in their fields to recognize that we had showed something that no one else had, and still today no one else has, that would be so beneficial to people, particularly with this tragic, horrible disease. I don't know if you've ever had a family member or someone affected by it, but it was so deflating for me, and that ultimately was the beginning of the end of what I thought was going to be the rest of my life or career in academics. I just couldn't imagine any more begging, these people at these organizations for money to do research. And it really dawned on me as I kind of did a little self-survey of all of my colleagues at the University of Miami. 99% of the people there are doing either pharmacology or genetics, and it's not even 1%. I mean, I was literally one of a handful of people doing work in nutrition, supplements, and exercise. And so I just said, man, I'm not going to beat my head against the wall for the next 20 or 30 years of my life or career, begging people for money to do work that is completely under and unappreciated. And I just felt like I had to move on. But anyway, I have this excitement on the one hand, but I still have like this, this pain or this sadness on the other, where I just feel like this message is not, it's not appreciated, and it never will be by big pharma or, the so-called institution.
Right.
It just won't be. But anyway, that doesn't stop me from doing what I'm doing. And I'm no longer begging people for money. I'm just going to make my business successful enough that I ultimately fund the additional research myself. I mean, that's part of my mission as well. I don't even care to ask people about, funding, making a donation to research or an investment in a business or whatever. I spent a few years going down that road, and I said, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm making the money myself, and I'll ultimately fund it myself. It may take me longer to get there, but that's fine.
Yeah. And that was a, when you first mentioned the first study that you spent, $200,000 and it couldn't even, cover the 4 lab draws per year, it could only cover 2, like, because to some people that seems like a lot of money, but in research, it's barely a drop in the hat, for some of these studies. So studies cost a lot of money, especially nutrition. And a lot of people think that we need more studies, or there's not studies on nutrition. Well, that's one reason why. It's one barrier to entry is the financial, hurdles, right? But kind of coming to the close, getting closer. So I want to kind of do some quick fire questions for you. And
Okay.
for anyone listening, Dr. Lewis is a fit individual, very, very muscular. What is your current fitness routine? How do you, stay fit? How do you manage your time? And if you had more time, would your exercise routine change?
Great question. So no, I'm pretty, it would definitely not change. I love what I do. I do strength training every day. I do a split routine. So I'm doing 3 days of, like different body parts. And then on the 4th day, I restart it. I don't take a day off. I just go every day. And I've been doing that for decades now. Up until a couple of months ago, I was sprinting once or twice a week. I tweaked a hamstring, so I've been letting my hamstring recover. And as I'm sure you know, soft tissue injuries are never fun.
Never fun.
No, they're never fun. But I feel pretty good now. In fact, I was just thinking about once I get over this jet lag, hopefully in another day or two, I may shoot for Saturday or Sunday to sprint again. But I love to sprint. I'm the kind of person that I'm into high intensity stuff. So, and that's why the weight training, the strength training, I guess evolved out of this desire. When I was a kid, I was very skinny and thin. So I probably overcompensated getting into bodybuilding, wanting to bulk up and get more muscular. But yeah, that's what I do every day. I love it. I live for, it's about a 30-minute routine. I'm very efficient. I don't waste any time. I'm the kind of person who, when I'm exercising, I'm not on the phone. I don't want to be bothered by phone calls or, texting or any of that stuff. I'm really focused on my routine. And I feel like, probably I mean, at least in terms of my own adaptation, I've been doing this for so long now that I don't need like, an hour and a half. I mean, I just don't need it. And I get so much benefit. I feel like, like cardiovascularly, like when I look at my labs occasionally, when I have my blood drawn and everything, get my blood pressure checked, whatever. I mean, there's nothing that's off. I mean, everything, my lab work is all good. So I don't feel like I need to like spend, another 30 minutes doing cardio or any of that stuff. I'm so fine tuned, I guess you could say at this point in my life, I'm really, pretty, I'm good, like
You're consistent. You're
yeah,
consistent. You're diligent. You have your routine. You stick to it. For some people, like they need rest days, but if you're doing a consistent 30 minutes a day and you have your set schedule, you have your routine, I think you can get away with that. And it's
yeah.
obviously working for you. So, what kind or what is your foundational supplement routine? I know this can change based on situations during, if you're sick or if you have
Right.
a campaign or whatever, but what is your kind of your foundational supplement stack?
Great question too. So definitely the polysaccharide formula that I mentioned in our research. I mean, that's a go-to. I've been using that now for 10 plus years. In addition to that, I definitely do like all the different vitamins and minerals. My formula is it's not like a Centrum or a one a day. It's really a very polysaccharide focused formula. So it's not, it doesn't have like a lot of, for example, vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, B complex, but I include all those, vitamin K, vitamin D, of course. I think everybody should be on D. I mean, that's just, we have a population of people that are either insufficient or deficient on D. D, as you know, it's interacting with at least, I think now it's over 3,000 genes. I mean, it just every day it keeps getting discovered as doing more and more things within our genes. So it's so important. I mean, man, you got to be taking your D. If you're not getting out in the sun every day for 15 or 20 minutes, take your 4,000 units of vitamin D every day. And what else do I leave out? Minerals, I do selenium, zinc, copper. I like to take enzymes with every meal. I eat about 2 meals a day. That's my usual
Cool.
routine for eating. And then I take creatine every day. I'm a big believer and big fan of creatine. I definitely notice if I miss creatine for a few days, my strength will go down a little bit. And that's pretty much it. But
Nice.
I definitely am a fan of, there are some people out there who say, oh, you can get everything you need from food. I don't agree with that.
I don't either. Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I mean, the world is too polluted. The soil, the air, the water, everything is so polluted today. We have all this electromagnetic radiation. All this crap is constantly bombarding us. And so we need the nutritional support. At worst, you're just going to have expensive urine. But why not take the extra precaution to get all these things in a good quality dietary supplement and help protect yourself, help your cells function properly? I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you have financial challenges, of course, that's understandable. You can't afford to take certain things. I get it. A lot of people I know are in that condition today with everything going on with the economy. But if you can't afford it, I mean, you're foolish not to.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we could get all of our nutrients from food. I just don't think it's possible, especially in today's day and age and the fast-paced lifestyle that a lot of people, live. Okay. So if you could, I think I know your answer, but I'm going to ask you anyways. If you're going to a deserted island and you can only take one herb, one mineral, one vitamin with you, what would you take with you? And I think the audience could already answer this question.
Yes. But besides hopefully having some clean water, it's definitely the Aloe Polysaccharides. I mean, they're just so amazing. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And we could do a whole show just talking about all the more of the research and a lot of the anecdotal things that I've experienced with that particular nutrient over my life. But yeah, it would be that. I mean, of course, you're going to run out of vitamin minerals at some point. You need those too. But in terms of anything beyond that, I mean, it's definitely the Aloe Polysaccharides.
Nice. And so you mentioned you take that one every day. So there's no need to pulse that from your experience. Take it for like a 3-month period and back off. So you think it's fine to take? Yeah.
No, you want them every day.
Got it. Very cool. Yeah. All right. So if you could put a 1 or 2 sentences on a billboard or, something that you want everyone to read as they drive by or pass by, what would you say and why?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think it would not necessarily, maybe it'd be like a combination of my 2 favorite phrases. And those are, let food be thy medicine, which that's obviously Hippocrates. That's not me saying that. And you are what you eat. And those 2 things combined, I mean, to me, they're so important for all of us. And kind of going back to, this original idea of our own health as our responsibility, not the responsibility of, someone else or a government mandate. It's what we should be doing for ourselves. So just let food be thy medicine, and you are what you eat. I mean, they're just so self-explanatory.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. Food is medicine. Where can people find you, online? Where can they find your resources? You sent me some really great articles earlier, and I'll definitely include those in the show notes for people listening. But where can people, learn more about polysaccharides? Where can they find your website?
So drlewisnutrition.com would be our primary website. We have social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under the same Dr. Lewis Nutrition. That's DR, no period, and then LEWIS.
Okay, perfect. Well, Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your knowledge on polysaccharides. It's been really fun learning about your journey and from research into the realm of nutrition and how you still maintain a healthy lifestyle and how you wouldn't change a thing. So I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, buddy. It's my pleasure. I have really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Fredrickson Health Show.
We'll love that. Well, anyways, have a great day. Go have a good workout if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay?
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. While you're at it, leave us a rating and review. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email newsletter for more information.